birthday party because it was with family.
Imekuwa anniversaire fete ya mzuri kwa sababu imefanyika ndani ya jamaa.
Exile International was launched because of devastating wars in DR Congo and Uganda, where over 100,000 children have been abducted by rebel armies, forced to murder, forced to fight, enslaved, and also where over 4 million children have been orphaned because of the wars. And knowing that that's a reality for these children, we simply could not look the other direction. How do we take children who the war has devastated and provide rehabilitative care and help change their lives?
I just remember thinking, these people are in exile. They want to go home, but they can't go home because it's unsafe. And then when I learned more about child soldiers and kind of what that looked like for them, what I learned is often they will try to go back home after they escaped captivity, but their communities and their villages reject them because they have often been forced to kill in their villages. So they're forced to either become street children or to go back to the rebel force and to become a child soldier yet again. And so they are living in exile. They really just want to go home after either escaping or being rescued, but they don't feel like that they can.
Exile International doesn't do any of the rescuing of the children, but the UN, the United Nations, does. And when the kids are in these militia groups, the United Nations can go in and actually rescue them. Or a lot of the times you will also find that some of the children actually escape. A lot of the children within our programs, that's their story. They've escaped, and it's really amazing the ways that the children find exile, because not only is it rescued child soldiers that we serve, but it's also children that are orphaned by war. And so a lot of the times they actually come to us through pastors, because some of these kids have been orphaned. The pastors know that they're orphaned, and so they'll bring them to our programs.
In both countries, in Uganda and Congo, our top thing that we try to do is first see if there is a family member or guardian who's a safe person for the kids to live with, because that's so important. Family's so important. Having just a really safe home life is a foundational thing that we want to do. But in the event that, you know, a kid has been orphaned and they can't provide for themselves, or maybe they don't have a safe family member, we have this really sweet program that we call host families, and it's very similar to foster care. Parents who have been well vetted by local leaders, church leaders, our staff, who are willing to act as the parents of these kids or legal guardians of these kids in addition to our staff.
That's where we really began in 2008. That was our heart, but we soon realized we wanted more for these children. We didn't want to see them just overcoming trauma. There was so much more to life than that. So going beyond rehabilitation, we began education programs, discipleship programs, and leadership development programs. And through this comprehensive approach, we've chosen to go maybe not as wide, but very, very deep. We look at each child, providing for the needs that, if they were my own child, what would they need, both emotionally, physically, and spiritually.
So that's why we've committed to long-term care with the children and long-term holistic care. So that's where Healing Spirits, Healing Minds, and Healing Bodies kind of come in. Healing Spirits, we focus on art-focused trauma care and peace-building skills, and of course discipleship. And that's kind of the core of what we do and what brings the children back to life again in a lot of ways. The second is healing of minds, and so that we focus on quality education, leadership skill development with them. One thing we realized at the very beginning is we can help the children really heal from their wounds of trauma, but if we leave them in poverty, then they'll just be in poverty forever. And so we realized how important education is, because it teaches them a skill, it gives them a higher education so that they can kind of lift themselves out of poverty. And then healing of the bodies, focusing on food and clothing and medical care. We've also provided several operations for children who actually have physical wounds because of the war. And our dream and our goal is to empower those children, walk beside of them through their healing into the plans that God has for their life. And we believe that is to be the change makers in their countries.
Let us United, we shall stand. Divided, we shall fall. Let us ask the Lord to give us the spirit of unity.
So I knew from an early age that counseling was just part of what I was supposed to do. I also, from an early age, knew some type of work in Africa was what God was going to do with my life. I didn't know that they were going to intersect. I received my counseling degree and my psychology degree because I knew that God was leading me in that direction. I went to a treatment center for post-traumatic stress disorder, and the last Sunday I wanted to go to church. And so I just walked to the nearest church. In that church there was a man who was speaking who had survived the Rwandan genocide. And he was talking about the people of Rwanda, and he was talking about peace and reconciliation and trauma care and counseling, and how he had started an organization to provide healing because the trauma was really so severe in Rwanda. And I remember sitting in that pew, and it kind of this light bulb went off, and I thought, could God use my background in counseling and my love for Africa in one place? And I went up to that gentleman afterwards and I said, tell me more about your organization and what you all do. And he said, well, why don't we get coffee tomorrow? And so we did, and he said, well, we're going to Congo next year. Why don't you consider going with us? And so I did, and it was on that trip that really led to the founding of Exile after I'd met the children there who'd survived war. So I joke a lot that me saying yes to getting treatment for my severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder actually led me into a war zone. But it's funny to think of God's plans for your life and how He orchestrates just tiny, really turns and corners to open up doors to where He really wants you to be.
So I can tell you about my first trip ever overseas. So I was hired by Exile the end of July 2017, hopped on a plane for my first ever international trip 2 weeks later. Landed in Uganda, had never been before. So excited, had no idea what to expect in terms of like what was actually happening on the ground. Met the team together for the first time, so much fun, and immediately we go to what we call our peace clubs, which is, group activities. We rode on these motorbikes about an hour out into, the villages, and all of a sudden there's just this group of kids singing and dancing. We drive up and we hop off with our staff so we can do a peace club, our first ever activity, and immediately they want you to be part of the family. So I get there, and like first thing, there's this coordinated dance. And of course they're gonna grab the brand new person who has to go out and be a part of this dance, who doesn't have a rhythm like everybody else there. And so it was like the most beautiful, awkward, wonderful thing that they probably could have done to me, because I was like, yep, we're in it. Like, we're here, this is so much fun. I look ridiculous and I'm having the best time. And it like immediately broke the ice with the kids, with the staff. And I think just like laid this really sweet moment for us to like connect and laugh together and just like be a part of it from the first moment I was there.
One of my most rewarding experiences working with Exile was in September of 2019. I got to travel to Uganda and meet some of the children in our programs. It was so rewarding to see the kids in person who I've seen photos of. I've read their stories. I feel like I know them, but I had never met them. And I remember we were in a van and I was sandwiched between our country liaison at the time and our managing director. And I remember looking out the window as we pulled up to the center, and I saw this boy, his name's Samuel, and I knew him immediately. And the moment I saw him, I got tears in my eyes, and I was still in the van, but I had tears in my eyes, and the second they parked, I just flung the door open. I jumped over Jared, and I went straight to Samuel, and I said, Samuel! And I hugged him, and he hugged me back, and he was like, hi! And then he pulled away from me, and he said, do I know you? And I said, I guess you don't, but I know you. And it was a fun experience because I was able to then talk to him, and he shared parts of his story with me that I already knew, but it was such a different experience hearing it from him in person, and it made everything so real. And so that was the most rewarding day that I've had at my job so far.
For me, it began in around 2006. I was finishing my degree in psychology, planning to start a degree in counseling, but not quite knowing what was next. Well, I saw a documentary about the wars in northern Uganda. And in this documentary was where I first learned about children who were being abducted, used as slaves, used as child soldiers. And I just honestly could not get that out of my mind. I would literally daydream about this. I would think about it at night. I would wake up thinking about this. And I found the first opportunity I could to go and spend about a month the following summer in northern Uganda within the displacement camps. And displacement camps were places the government had set up. They're basically refugee camps, but within one's own country. But these were set up because of a war that had been going on for nearly 2 decades. 2 decades of hundreds of thousands of people losing their lives, millions of children losing their parents. And it was there in those displacement camps that I felt like this is exactly what God created me for. I knew that this is what I would focus my counseling education really on, serving this population. So a mutual friend connected me with Bethany, and we really just started doing this mission together, putting one foot in front of the other, not quite knowing what was next, but knowing that something had to be done in that moment.
So The Color of Grace is the story of really how my life connected to the lives of the children that we now work with at Exile International. And it starts out really just talking about struggles that I had in a diagnosis of PTSD and severe depression, and even as a counselor, as a therapist, as someone with letters behind her name. That journey was very humbling because I was the one that was supposed to kind of have all the answers. And so the book talks about how really reaching out for help and getting treatment led me into a short-term mission trip. And that is the short-term mission trip where I went to Congo for the first time in 2008. And the story from there really talks about how brave the children are that we work with. One of the things I wanted to make sure I did in writing the book is tell their stories well. And the book actually ends with letters that the children wrote to the world. So I wanted to make sure that their voices were heard. And I asked them, if you could write a letter to the world, what would you say? And so many of their answers were about forgiveness. Just one little boy that I'm thinking of, he was actually shot in the head and survived. And he was in the bush, he was in the forest for days, thinking that he would die, but he didn't die. And I remember looking at him and asking him, how can you talk about forgiveness after everything that you've gone through? And he said, if we don't forgive, the peace will never come. And so that taught me so much about true forgiveness. It isn't necessarily about the other person or even about me. It's about the only option to have peace is to forgive. So the book talks a lot about how resilient these children are in terms of surviving war and surviving captivity, and also our partners on the ground. It talks a lot about how they sacrifice day in and day out to minister to the children and to love them so well. work that we do with the children, we use art and dance and drama and music and storytelling. The beauty in all of that is that you just see them come back to life again, that you're able to see them become children again. So much of their childhood was just lost. And so when they're able to dance and to sing and to do dramas, when they're able to draw their heartaches and draw their hopes and their dreams, they tap into a little bit of their childhood that they missed. With trauma, when you experience severe trauma, part of your brain shuts down. So I often will describe trauma as memories frozen in time. And whenever the children are able to tell their stories through creative ways, they don't have to use the language part of their brain, because it's so difficult when you've experienced deep trauma to use the language part of your brain. And so they're able to do dramas about their time of captivity and what it was like to be rescued and what it was like to go to school for the first time. They do dramas about forgiveness. They write songs about Jesus saving them. And for the children that we work with, Jesus saving them, they don't just mean spiritually. They mean literally saving my life.
One of the things that we do is we have the children, we do these handkerchiefs, and we have the children take them and they draw their story on the handkerchief. And they start with a piece of it that is the kind of the past, what they've been through, what trauma have they experienced. And it's incredible some of the things that these children draw because they're so young, and you see them drawing soldiers with guns and dead bodies and blood and machetes and AK-47s, things that 7-year-olds should not have a reference for. And it's a beautiful way that they can actually get it out of their head and out of their body onto something else, because they can't get it out through their words, but they can get it out through their drawing. So they'll draw, you know, when they come out of captivity, when they're rescued or when they've escaped, and what life looks like now that they're at Exile International. And then they'll also draw what their dreams are for the future, so they have something to look forward to. And we have them draw them on the handkerchiefs because it kind of represents that, you know, handkerchiefs catch tears, and their sadness can turn into something really beautiful, and God can bring all the bad and traumatic things that they've been through. He can bring it full circle, and he can make something beautiful out of it. This is another thing that Bethany has the children do, is when she first started going on trips, she would bring over these seed papers. And it was so interesting when she first told me that she had the kids do this, but she would bring these seed papers over, and what she would do is she would have them draw or write something that was painful, a painful memory on this seed paper. And then they would bury it in the ground, and as the kids watered it and tended to it, it would actually bloom and grow flowers or grow something beautiful. So it was another illustration of like, hey, your hurt and the dark seasons of your life, the hurt and the trauma that you've been through, God can make that beautiful. And this is a physical representation of that. I'm gonna have you draw it or write it down on the seed paper. We're gonna plant it in the ground. You're gonna water it, and God's gonna bring something beautiful out of that. And so now we've started bringing over seed paper that's like in the form of hearts, or in the form of really cute little hearts, or, you know, flowers or sunshine, to just, you know, bring joy to the children too. You know, they see something beautiful and they're like, oh.
Jesus often taught in story. These kids are sharing their stories. I think that's even a big part of it, and just like a sweet way that he's weaving it all together. You know, he often spoke in parables, and it was a way to captivate people's attention, and they got to really experience him, and we're seeing that with the kids. One of our kids who now leads his own program, his first maybe year in the program, he was bitter, he was hurt, he had been abducted by 2 rebel groups. You know, our staff said his first year, he broke out of his shell through worship. He didn't want to talk to anybody. He didn't want to draw. He didn't want to do anything. But worship connected with him. He wasn't a believer at the time, but singing, hearing music, it just like opened something up inside of him, and it allowed him to start putting words to what he was feeling.
It is an opportunity to write their story as if it's not even their own. I had one child I worked with who she simply could not share her story. Yet when asked to draw a tree or to draw a house, her story and her pain began coming out there on the paper, because it was so much safer to simply draw it here, almost as if it's outside of me. It's also beautiful when you see these children work together in groups, and oftentimes you'll ask if someone wants to share their story or if they want to share their drawing. It's crickets at first, it's quiet, no one wants to be the first. But one child, there's always at least one child that's brave enough to share, and they share their story. And what begins to happen as they share is everyone else in the room starts realizing, wait, you had that same experience too. I thought I was alone. That's one thing that trauma does to us. It isolates us, makes us feel like we are the only one. No one could ever understand me. But in that atmosphere of a group, when one child shares and the others go, wait, I've been through that too. You've been through that. Maybe you could understand me. Then another child shares and another child. And that in and of itself begats healing.
And when I think of the challenges, I think of just the reality of working in war zones. I often say, if I would have known the brutality of what our team has experienced as a result of working in the war, I would have just said, no, I'm not doing it. I would have just said, it's too big for me and I'm not doing it. When I say that, the things that are coming to mind is how our team overseas have experienced kidnappings, they've experienced rapes, they've experienced an ambush, paralysis. And all of them could move outside of Congo. They could all live somewhere else. But they choose to live there and they choose to stay because of their love for the children.
You know, someday I hope to grow up to be like my brother and friend and teammate Joseph. Joseph is Exile's country director in Congo. He and his family actually chose to move in and live at Exile International's residential care facility. They've invested their lives into hundreds of children, and they do it so unbelievably selflessly and with joy. About a year and a half ago, Joseph and several other teammates were traveling from one care program to another. Anytime you do that, anytime you travel in Congo, you have to cross really dangerous areas where fighting is happening, where you're taking a chance of being ambushed or hurt. And this time they were, when their car was ambushed and shot, and not just the car, but 5 bullets struck Joseph.
I was at a wedding, and I remember I got a text message from the founder of Exile International, Bethany, and it was telling us that our Congolese program director had been wounded in a rebel ambush. And I just remember thinking in that moment, there's nothing I can do, because I felt I was so far away. I called my boss immediately and we just cried and then we prayed. And that was the moment I realized this work is very important. I have coworkers in Africa who are risking their lives to care for these children, to, make sure that they're okay and make sure that they're getting the quality of life that they deserve.
Thankfully, our staff were able to get him to safety into a hospital, but he began a year of rehabilitation that began with one trying to survive today because he had lost so much blood in the wounds from the bullets, to then finding out he's paralyzed and has almost no chance of ever walking again. But wait, you said there's a chance. Well, yeah, we'll give you a 4% chance. To which another staff member, he's like Joseph's right-hand man, and his brother laughed. He literally laughed when they said, you have a 4% chance of walking. He said, our God is so much bigger than that. And today, After a year of rehabilitation, Joseph actually does walk.
And it was one of the most surreal moments, I think, as a team here and with our family overseas, because it was like we were told he has a 4% chance of walking, but I don't think anybody believed that number could be right, because we all knew he was gonna walk again. Like, he survived for a reason. Every day he was sending us messages of encouragement saying, like, I will get better. He was sending scriptures. He was sending update videos of him getting stronger. He started sending videos of him walking, which was beautiful. And then he casually started, you know, a quote unquote church in the hospital that he was healing in South Africa. And he was doing all of this just because he genuinely loves people and said, you know, God works all things together for good. And he has redefined hope and courage for a lot of people, and I know especially in my life.
There's a happy ending to the story, praise God. But once all of that, all the details started to come out, one thing that Joseph said was, even if you didn't pay me, I would still do this work. And so that was one of the most challenging moments, but also once we got through it, one of the most rewarding, because we've all learned so much from it. And it just reminds me every single day how important our work is.
So Exile has been around, we're going on 13 years this August. I've had graduates who've gone back to their home communities and started their own healing groups. They've started their own care programs under the mentorship and leadership of our staff in Congo, and they're raising up the next generation of, you know, leaders for peace in their communities.
We follow them actually for 3 years after they graduate. Most of the children we work with have been orphaned. We do that for a lot of different reasons. One is because our staff acts as their parents in many ways, and we want to make sure that they're launching well into their community, that they're able to take care of themselves, and if they get married, that they're able to take care of their families as well. So in following them 3 years after they graduate, we're able to see what God is doing with their lives. We're able to see how they have come into the program as somebody severely traumatized, and what God is doing with their lives and how they're recreating the program back in their villages.
For me personally, I think the world is getting better. I have not given up on humans yet. I think that there is so much more good in the world than there is evil. Even doing the work with Exile International, truly, I get to see children who have come out of such evil start to do such good and beautiful things. I can reference Baraka. He actually was abducted 2 different times by 2 separate rebel groups. I think the first time he was 10 years old and the second time he was 15 years old. But when he came into our program, he was very traumatized and it was really hard for him. But when he graduated the program, he ended up going back to the rebel group that abducted him and started a Bible study with them. And these rebels would come and learn about the gospel from Baraka, who is a former child soldier, but now doing good.
At first, I thought I was missing something with translation. And I got our country director over to make sure I was catching everything, and he truly was leading a Bible study. They're showing up with AK-47s, but they're coming to talk to Baraka because in him, they're curious. These rebels were probably kids just like Baraka that were abducted and taken from their homes at one time. They cannot go home. But in Baraka, they see this young man who has been able to go home. He is not only home, but he has hope and he has joy. He has all of the things that you or I would want. And he begins sharing with them the good news of Christ and how that has transformed his life and how these care programs have changed their life, and they're curious. And he was elated to tell me about this. And I was elated to hear, and as any good parent would, I worried about his safety. And we asked, Baraka, you know how dangerous this is. To which he looks back at us with this beautiful smile that only Baraka could give and says, this is why Jesus saved me. I had nothing else to say.
I don't ever want to give up on the hope that we can live in a peaceful and good world. And I think, it makes me want to cry, but I think that the work we do at Exile International really aids in that. Just by that story of Baraka, you know, being able to see his life and so many others too. Without Exile International, their life would have went a very different way. But because of Exile International, they are now on a path to healing and to helping others heal. Baraka has started his own Village Peace Club that he leads with, I think, 86 rescued child soldiers, 86 kids who have been orphaned by war, and he is now transferring what he learned and what he got from Exile International to these kids. And it's just gonna keep going. It's just gonna keep multiplying. And so I have hope. I have hope, and I think Exile plays a really vital role in keeping the good in the world.
When I think about times of joy, what comes to mind is, again, I think of those first 25 kids that we worked with, and I think of what they're doing with their lives right now. I think of Augustine, and I remember being in the back of the car with him, and him saying, Mom, I want to show you my favorite verse. And he read, "Blessed are the peacemakers." And so even though I'm crying, those are moments that just fill me with joy, because I just see, I see what God is doing in these children's lives, and really the children that the world would give up on. And they're defying all of that with the resilience. They're defying all of that with living in purpose out of their pain.
Not to say it too simply, but we can do more together. For us, knowing that these children are in the situations they are in, child survivors of war, rescued child soldiers, me turning and looking the other way does not change the reality of where they are today. For me, that's all it takes for me to get engaged. The question maybe isn't why should you care about this particular mission, but why should you care, period. Go and do something. Don't sit on the couch and do nothing, but find something. Find what God has gifted you with. Find the passions, the drive, the unique skills that God has given you, and use those. Or if you don't know where to use them, say, God, how have you made me? What's unique, and what do I have to offer? And go and do something with that.
There's so many different ways you can be involved with Exile. I mean, you can share, you can follow us on social media and then share, tell your friends about us. We have an ambassador program where you can host parties, you can host, a little mini event with your friends where you can tell them about this and why you're passionate about it. You can even sign up to give $1 a month as a Restore partner, as a recurring donation. That's $12 a year, and that's $12 towards a child's care. Even just word of mouth, spreading the awareness around Nashville and around any community that you have is amazing.
We've had kids who love to do art, and so they draw and they paint and they sell the art, and then they're able to sponsor a child because of that. Or they make a documentary, or they give away their birthday, or they use their voice on social media to start a campaign, because so many people don't know that the war is still going on. They don't even know what a child soldier is. And I think that's my challenge really to everyone, is to say, what is my part of this story?
You're inheriting a world. Every generation is inheriting a world, and you get to choose whether you make that world better or you make it worse. I think that caring about the rehabilitation and the healing of child soldiers and children who have been orphaned by war, who are eventually going to grow up and inherit the world, it's important, because our mission is to make leaders for peace.
Every single person is worthy of love. Every single person, is a son or a daughter of the kingdom. We don't necessarily get a say in where we're born, what communities, we're raised up in. There's a lot of things in life that happen to us that we don't have a control over, but we also all have this beautiful opportunity to love people the way Jesus did.
Frank Warren says, "It's the children the world almost breaks who grow up to save it." That quote is so powerful to me, because it really speaks to how purpose comes from pain, and how the very thing that we think will kill us is the very thing that God uses for His glory to reach other people in a way that they may never be able to be reached. I believe that a lot of us feel like life ends whenever we've experienced our greatest heartache, when for a lot of us, that's really where life begins. Whenever we can look beyond our pain, when we can look beyond our trauma, realize that there's somebody somewhere in the world that needs the wisdom that comes from the pain that we have experienced. Whenever we get to that point of God using our pain for purpose and our pain for His glory, and reaching other people through the lessons that we have learned through our trauma, then grace comes full circle, then redemption happens. I believe when our greatest heartache becomes our greatest ministry, then grace comes full circle.